This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
And thank you, Jordan Pease and the crew here at the Metaphysical Library. How many really deep metaphysicians are here tonight? Okay. How many scientists? All right. Great. How many lapsed Catholics? How many extraterrestrials? Okay. All right. Great. That's fine. Now, I'm going to show some pictures, and we're going to let them trigger you. I'm sure it's still on. Okay. Briefly, I met Cleve while on a date, and my typesetter worked in his lab making little devices. And there will be devices coming out this year from HeartMath Institute and from others that will enable anyone who wants to hook it up to a plant, a tomato, a banana, a test tube full of cells, and watch it react. And I have been honored to hang out in Cleve's lab, getting to know him. But this is a man who had no intention of ever being involved in leading edge research, and especially communication, even though as a teenager he found out through a fluke that hypnosis works. He read a book on it, he hypnotized his roommate went into deep trance, did what he said, and then when he brought him out, he says, now see, that was total, doesn't work. But the roommate had done exactly what he had said, so he goes, okay, humans are vulnerable to hypnosis. He got drafted, or he would have been drafted, so he joined the Navy right after Pearl Harbor. And this is our man, Mr. Straight Guy, Navy man. His ears listening to all. No one would listen to him when he was in the military. This is Cleve in 1966. We're skipping a lot of biographical details because I have 74 pictures to zip through. And everything's in the book in vivid scientific detail and in chronological order. Cleve was hanging out in his polygraph lab, surrounded by his instrumentation. If you know, polygraph people don't use the word machine. If you use the word machine, that signals you're not a scientist. His secretary had bought a couple of plants on sale just to have them in the lab because it was a pretty drab place. This is on Times Square in New York City. And one night, very early in the morning actually, he decided to hook up the galvanic skin response portion to a plant. Now, I know he's talking to it, but he won't admit it because at this time he was still, as he would say, let's see what I would say, what he would say. We're opposites, Virgo, Pisces. You understand? I'm the Virgo. He listened to plants, even though he was known as the man who talks to plants, and he would only listen because there was an instrument showing there was something to listen to. This is the famous Dracaena plant that got hooked up that fateful night, February 2nd, 1966. I don't know about you, but in 1966, I think I was sampling my first joint, and I was going, wow. But this was his big wow. And he had no intention of creating a discovery here. But after it ignored him, he he kept going until he got a response. This is a polygraph, typical, 3 tiers, that's polygraph. You've got your heartbeat, your breathing up on top, and the middle part is the galvanic skin response. This is what happens when there is an attempt to deceive, a big response and some change in all of the charts. I'm not an expert. I've been a volunteer at his school, and Cleve still lives in San Diego running a polygraph school. And that's how he funds his research. This was the beginning when he decided to put that electrodes on the leaf, and he used a special little thing that didn't hurt the leaf. And this is where he put the pen up to make sure there was a reading. And he thought, oh my God, look, it's showing a human-like tracing right here on the graph. Some of you who can't see it, you can either come up or it's all in the book very clearly. This is a comparison. Over here is a plant. Over here is a human. So he thought, wow, I think I will give it a reason to fear me, a threat, or, like he would with a person. And at first he tried to dip a neighboring leaf in hot coffee. Nothing happened. It started going into boredom. And then he decided, I'm going to burn that leaf. And he headed off to get the matches. And when he came back, he noticed, voila, the second he made that decision, the pen hit the top of the chart. Now, those of you who've heard this before say, well, of course, plants are so psychic. I knew that. But for a scientist, he was in Times Square. He wanted to run out and yell, my plant read my mind. But he held himself back. And he knew that at that time in the morning, this is, I think it's like almost 5 a.m. Yeah, Times Square was not the place to go running around yelling, my plant read my mind. Although it would have blended right in, actually. This is what happened after he threatened. He just passed the match close to the plant, and this is extreme excitation. And he thought, I think this plant has had enough. I'll put the matches away, and then it starts to calm down. This was his big wake-up call. This was his Bodhi tree when the lightning struck. So here it is, this totally straight guy, dedicated to truth, was given a lesson by this plant. This is in 1972. The plant's becoming quite a monster. It's dominating his life. Because, of course, he has to show his friends, and he started calling in all the colleagues. And I know some of you are laughing because you have plants that dominate your life. When it's hooked up to a graph, and there's his little special gentle, screws on, so it's not like a pincher that increases the pain. He doesn't really want to hurt plants at all. But threat with a meaning, yes, we're going to get it. This is the plant in 2002. Growing into the ceiling, we had to remove the ceiling panels, and it grows all the way over his desk. It's a monster, and it's been in the same soil for 30 years, so it doesn't care. It's even getting a hit right now because we're all looking at it. Okay. This is his special C-clamp device, which makes steady, it's steel plates, all right, because he found that if you have a regular pincher, it'll eventually cause the plant to faint. This is his early EE meter that he uses when he runs out of graph paper, or when he decides to save money on it. And believe me, Cleve Backster knows how to pinch $1. But because of that, he was able to keep going for over 36 years, one thing after another. And as you will see, the plants open the way to all these other discoveries. I'm going backwards, sorry. This is one of his adventures in the early days. This is the Stolting company that makes polygraphs and other instrumentation and is still in business today. If you call them up, they will sell you some kind of biocommunication device at a few $100. But this is an early experimentation with an oscilloscope where he's working with the head of the Stolting Company. This was a great visit because they took him from working with the latest polygraph to this special oscilloscope. They put an orange on the floor, and when they dropped an X-Acto knife with the intention of hitting that orange, and they lined it up perfectly, the orange would react while the knife was on its way down. If they moved the knife aside to just hit very close and dropped it, the orange would not react. So therefore, the orange knew when it was going to hit. And this was instrumental in his decisions later on to go to automation rather than using living subjects. In his lab in New York, Lillian, the famous secretary who brought the plants in the first place, this is his dog, Pete, the Doberman. And Pete is very intense, especially when it comes to treats. And whenever Cleve had his plant hooked up, and Pete would dominate Lillian, "Where's my treat?" And Lillian is very nervous around dogs anyway, and the plant would go like this. So, I mean, this is going on the whole time. It keep Cleve very entertained. It's a little washed out. Maybe we could turn off some of these lights. I'm not sure how. But in this little tiny cup, which is about this big, there are some brine shrimp. And those of you who have fish aquarium know that brine shrimp are born to die. They are food for aquarium fish. And Cleve decided before he let the press in that he would automate. And the reason he decided to go to automation was because humans are chaotic, in case you haven't noticed. Humans react to all kinds of things, just a word, a thought, a smell, we're reacting all the time. But brine shrimp are pretty much programmed to react to basically one thing when it's time to die. Otherwise, they're just wiggling around making love. And one of the things he learned in this process of setting up a totally automated experiment was that finding healthy brine shrimp is difficult. So the answer was use mating pairs. And yes, he did receive one letter from a person who read about his experiment and objected to killing off mating brine shrimp. But, like I said, he kept going because this was, his demonstration. Here's his cup dumping device. That he's a genius with mechanics. And he built that all from parts. He used railroad train parts and, this is the 60s. It's like, remember Xerox machines up this high, and it was all very, very much apropos before computers were available. And he hooked it up to, this was his big first experiment, and this is published. If any of you want copies of his published reports, you can get in touch through the website, and I will send it to you. Over there is the dump dish device. We changed it because we wanted it to be exact cupped dumping. Oddly enough, with the programmer and the randomizer, both of which he also built, here are these plants, and in the middle are the 4 Galvanic Skin Response with 1 control. Yes, he does use control on his experiments. There's 3 plants, and the idea was, will the plants react when there are no human elements around? And the only thing that's happening is the death of brine shrimp. And he showed very significantly that yes, they do react. The reason, there's so many stories I'm skipping over. This gave him an idea when one day he had a plant hooked up and he had some boiling water. He had made coffee and he needed the pot for something else, so he poured boiling water down the sink. And those of you who know about sinks know that there's living bacteria down there, quite a culture. And when that bacteria and the boiling water came together, there's a huge reaction of the plant. So that cued him in that the plant reacts to stuff we don't notice until now. We're going to notice all kinds of things. This is this amazing randomizer. has a chart up on top to show its chosen times, all these candles. He can explain how it is. I'm a psychic, not a scientist. It's just a piece of work. It really is. And he made it so it chose 1 of 6 times, and he would not be there to choose, so it was all there. Once he proved that plants react, he became known as the man who talks to plants, and he was called by all the talk shows. This is the early 70s. Once the published report was out, everyone was very amused. Plants reading your mind, ha ha ha. And David Frost being one of them. We included this one in the book because he had a black and white. He was on all the shows back in the 70s. But only about plants. In this show, he has a philodendron hooked to the galvanic skin response. And David Frost, being quite the skeptic, goes, well, how do you know if it's a male or a female plant? And spontaneously, Cleve says, well, why don't you go lift up a leaf and take a look? And so immediately, when he lifted up a leaf, the needle went like this, and it amused the audience. So he wasn't really in it for ego. You understand? He needed people to be aware of this so there wasn't a wall of non-belief. But he had allies back then. This is Marcel Vogel in the middle. Dorothy Ritalik, who did a lot of research with plants and music. And we have her thesis. Unfortunately, she died before she could publish it. She did a lot of very important work with music and plants. And one brief story worth telling was she demonstrated for her master's degree that plants listening to classical music grew more healthy and they grew towards the speakers, where plants listening to rock and roll, acid rock at the time, got weak and sort of grew away from the speakers. But Cleve, in all his scientific neutrality, said, now wait a minute, we need to get someone who loves rock and roll to do this experiment over. And it's true, you know, attitude of the experimenter has a voice in every experiment, and that's one of the things that has kept Cleve's research out of the mainstream until recently. This is where he was going. Again, I think this is 74. He's in there with Stanley Krippner, Buckminster Fuller. This is a series, just like here at the Metaphysical Library. Arthur C. Clarke, B.F. Skinner, J.B. Rhine. And by the way, J.B. Rhine was one of the places, he ran the parapsychology labs. As a psychic, I kind of kept parapsychologists at a distance, mainly because they were looking for cause and effect that had nothing to do with psychic stuff. Or, you know, it was just one of those, like, academic approach to something that you need to throw your preconceived notions out of the way. And every parapsychologist I've run into needed to be educated, and they didn't like that. But J.B. Rhine was like a real pioneer. He opened up the door to make it a science. And he thought Cleve's work was a form of ESP. And Cleve wrote him a letter and said, no, it is not ESP. It's not extrasensory perception, really. It's primary, because it goes on all the time before we even notice it. So it's a primary perception, which is how we got the term. So I thank J.B. Rhine for his contentious self. You know, he got very angry with Cleve when he wouldn't, like, bring his research down and put it in his lab and let him, you know, take over. But that's how it is in the science world, according to my sources. This was a fun thing. 1975, he was invited to the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And of course, they tried to knock him down, which is what they do there. They try to disprove your research. And Cleve just wouldn't be shot down. He just refused. He says, look, you know, even though you tried to duplicate my experiment, here's what you did wrong. You know, you don't stroke the plants before you hook them up, because then you bond. I mean, according to him, he left clear instructions. If you're going to do his experiment, you have someone else bring the plants in and leave them. You have no communication with the plant. Otherwise, that plant will bond with the person and react to the person's activity rather than, say, the death of brine shrimp. And that has, you know, he wrote it all out, but these other highfalutin scientists didn't obey the rules. Anyway, they sort of tried and then gave up. There's a lot of politics. But Esquire was there and gave him one of the dubious achievement awards for 1975 because he started telling the press and anyone else who would listen that yogurt is sentient. Now, he didn't say yogurt talks to itself, but it does communicate, as we will see. This is, again, Pete. Like I said, one thing leads to another. Pete the Doberman had to be fed every night, and he would be given an egg yolk. And one night he had a philodendron hooked up to a GSR, and when he broke the egg, the needle went like this. So Cleve goes, there must be something about the live egg that caused the plant to react. So he started working with eggs, and he figured out how to hook it up. Those of you who are a little scientific, he put boiled sponges in saline solution, hooked it up with a rubber band, and this is a fresh egg. He got eggs from a Virgo who had an egg farm upstate New York and would bring them down just for him. Us Virgos, we're always taking care of the scientists. Anyway, the egg shows that it's quite alive. This is a GSR, and it shows a tiny little pulse. This is way back in May of 1966. So he's doing all this different research simultaneously. But the stories only make sense if you talk about one subject at a time. This is when, 1972, this is an E-Coli. A tobacco heiress gave him a pile of money, so he bought a lot of equipment. He got an EEG, which is also used as an EKG. And there it is, a pulse in the egg, non-fertile, which means that this egg is not going to hatch, but it also shows that there's a possibility that there's a pulse in the field of the egg, even prior to fertility. And of course, as a scientist, Cleve goes, well, I have a lot more respect for chickens and for the contribution of the female. Because if
the frequency of that pulse is?
This one, 153 cycles per second, or 157, I believe. It's in the book. And it's the same pulse as a fetus, a chicken fetus. 150, it's pretty quick. This is a more complex pulse on the EEG. Now, some people, a biologist came along, Charles Granger, and he says, no, this cannot be a non-fertile egg. There's no way that it's going to have this pulse unless it's going to reproduce, unless it's growing in there. Well, apparently it was, because Charles Granger has become an ally of Cleve's and has, in his own way, revolutionized how biology is taken, Again, I'm skipping over some fascinating stories, and for you who like details, I'm truly sorry, but there's a lot of material. I'm giving you the overview. This is an egg. This is a fertile egg, April 1972. And there's nothing much going on in the lab. It's 3:24 a.m., and of course, our scientist, Cleve Backster, is hanging out in his lab doing pretty much nothing. And so we got pretty much nothing until Cleve decides to pick up his cat, who just got up from a nap. And he always says, those of you who know Siamese cats, they hate to be picked up without permission, especially if they're an Aries, which, Sam, his first Siamese cat, was an Aries and hated being picked up, so he got his claws out there. This is an egg. It's basically an egg reacting to an event, right? And this is just a superficial look, but again, this was a plan in the same month, April of 1972. He's been fascinated by eggs, and so he has this tray of eggs, and it's getting early in the morning. He's hungry, 6:43 a.m., he's been up all night. And there's the egg tracing. He's 25 feet away from the one being traced. And he takes egg number 2 and 3 and he puts them in boiling water for his breakfast. And look at the response he gets. 2 big, huge responses followed by 2 smaller responses, and then it slowly levels off to flatline. So those of you who like your eggs, now you know why we say thank you to the hens. And we can assume that the boiling water initiated a shock, and the next 2, as the heat penetrated to the yolk, there was the message, your time's up. And then it gradually flatlines, and then there's no more response. Now what Cleve says, I've got a repeatable experiment, hooray, hooray. So he went through all this rigmarole to set up an egg experiment demonstrating, this primary perception between eggs. What happened eventually was, he got it all totally automated, so there were no human elements. He set up a turntable and it rolled down a chute into the boiling water. The egg reacted to the first 2 just like this, and then flatlined all the rest of the eggs. And he came back hours later and there's a whole bunch of overly boiled eggs. Only one reaction. So the egg that was being monitored got the message and just stopped reacting. It's the equivalent of fainting. Same thing with plants. If you overstimulate a plant, it will faint, especially if it's an African violet. Here we are with an African violet, and he's just sitting there at his desk. This is EEG. African violets are especially sensitive because he was sitting there and he, again, decided he was going to break the egg. And the moment he decided, there is a big rise in the tracing. He didn't do it. He just intended to do it. And that's when the African violet reacted. So again, if you have African violets, keep your violent teenagers away from them, or they will faint for hours. And this African violet refused to bloom for years. Anyway, again, I believe it was an egg that tuned him into the fact that yogurt is alive. Cleve in his appetites. He's up all night, he gets hungry. Goes to the refrigerator, next food item was yogurt. So he stirred up the jam in the bottom of the yogurt. There's a big old reaction from the other room. He had it on a tone meter at this time. And all this noise from the tone meter just because he's stirring. This is the only thing going on. And the next time he did it, something's going on with the yogurt. And then he found out there's live bacteria. Acidophilus we know about. And then there's the Streptococcus bulgaricus, which is used to create yogurt, turn milk into a culture. And they don't put Streptococcus bulgaricus on the ingredients, they put S. Because no one's going to buy something with Streptococcus, but all it means is a certain type of shape of bacteria. Well, this started a whole nother line, and again, he's running plants, he's running eggs, he's running whatever will hold still. In fact, he even hooked up his dog Pete, and he put electrodes in his mouth and made him sit still. He was pretty good. And the minute he had those electrodes in there, he goes, "Where's the kitty?" And the right off the chart. It's easy with dogs. Not so easy with cats. This is his little 5 milliliter test tube. When it came to yogurt, silver electrodes won't do because they form silver nitrate, which is a bactericide, so he used gold wire. And he puts all the 5 milliliters of yogurt. Again, I'm rushing this wonderful story of yogurt, which he still eats, by the way. This is how he has the EEG, and he has the camera on the EEG. He starts setting up, observations so he can see on a monitor what's happening on the chart. He can be like 20, 30 feet away and just watch it. And then, of course, sometimes you're not supposed to watch because your watching interferes with the spontaneity. Again, with biocommunication, Spontaneity is absolutely just as necessary as integrity. You know, if a plant knows you mean it, you're going to get a response. But the plant will know if you don't. I mean, he's seen it over and over. In fact, it was in '68, I believe. He was at a party, and he was already kind of notorious in New York. And he met Ingo Swann. He also met Robert Monroe, that same Virgo party. Virgo named Zelda threw the party. And Ingo Swann was there and met Cleve, and they chatted, and he invited him up to the lab to investigate, you know, this thing with plants. Well, Ingo was a Scientologist and an artist and a gifted psychic. So he shows up and starts working with Cleve, and he says, well, show me. He says, no, you show me. Sit down and look at that plant, and I want you to threaten it with your mind. Well, that was easy for Ingo. He sat down and imagined pouring boiling acid over the roots, and instantly the plant reacted. He says, well, okay, do it again. You know, instantly the plant reacts. And he says, all right, let's talk about something else. Okay, one more time, do it again. This time the plant doesn't react. And Ingo says, well, how come I did exactly the same thing? Plant figured me out. Cleve never says, yes, the plant figured it out. He never said plants have feelings. He only said they know. They know when you mean it, they know when you don't. And as a polygraph, hey, this was great. He has zillions of stories of mixing a little biocommunication with his polygraph work, but he doesn't advertise them. In fact, I have a 33-page interview where he tells those stories. Any of you who want more about Cleve that's not in the book, get in touch through the website, and I will get that to you. This is his syringe that he used to put the yogurt in. You have to make sure there's no bubbles. This is an interesting story of bacteria in the yogurt reacting to bacteria on chicken. His cat, the famous Sam, is fond of chicken and won't eat anything else, so each week he got a friend, wife, to cook. And I'm having a moment of feminist rebellion here. Okay, I've been through a lot, you know, but it's okay. I mean, he didn't have an oven. I understand. Get the woman to do it. It's all right. All right, so in comes the chicken, and by the end of the week, the chicken's pretty gamey. But this is a spontaneous event where he has yogurt hooked up, and here is a first reaction when he tears the pieces. He takes it out of the refrigerator and tears pieces and puts it in a bowl, stripping it. And then over here is an even bigger reaction when he finishes stripping the carcass. And there's Sam drooling down below. Over here is when he puts it under the heat lamp. And this is the bigger reaction when he stirs the chicken and turns it over. Now, mind you, he doesn't know this is going on until he has a pip switch that shows the time. So he notes, you know, his activities to correlate the time. The big reaction is when he turns it over and the other side is under this heat lamp, which is killing the bacteria and heating up the meat. And then over here, he hands it to Sam, and Sam starts eating it, and as soon as the chicken gets down into Sam's stomach, flatline. Bacteria quits reacting to bacteria. This gave him all kinds of ideas, and he had biology people, he had botanists. He had a little trouble with botany people because they thought they knew everything about plants. And they said, they don't have a nervous system. They can't feel this. Well, it was the Russians. And again, thanks to Christopher Bird, we finally got a few translations of Soviet scientists who had done all of Cleve's research and improved on it. They were way ahead of us. And the Russians put out an article called Flower Recall by Pushkin and Dubrov that postulated, according to all this research they did, that plants have a neural net. They don't have a nervous system. They don't have a brain like we do, but they have a net. And they are able to respond. I mean, they showed it. We didn't know about it because no one translated it. Poor us. Well, now we know. This is a picture of Cleve's lab when it's clean. Right now he has a much bigger television. And we use the TV for split screen. This is him putting yogurt in a test tube. And this is a fun little story. Believe me, there are many you don't get to hear tonight. But this is an overview. He has a big open house for the American Polygraph Association. There's 150 polygraph, mostly law enforcement people, and they're drinking and having a good time in the lab. It's a pretty big lab. But there's almost no room to maneuver. So Cleve has some yogurt hooked up. And he's about 15 feet away from the yogurt, and he has the same syringe in his hand that he has hooked up. And he sees the tracing, there's a tracing, and he wonders, is the yogurt going to react to all these people? Or is it going to react to what happens to the rest of it? So he plops some yogurt in someone's vodka and tonic. That's it. Huge reaction. So here's the interesting thing. You know, we don't know if is the yogurt joining the party, is it getting drunk, or is it dying? Chances are the alcohol is killing it off. But interesting thing is, with all the stimulation, and he knows yogurt reacts to people and emotions, it's ignoring the people and reacting to yogurt. So it's tuning into its own self. It's showing prioritizing. And this is a clue for polygraph people. They know all about prioritizing. You know, they have this whole system of psyching people's bottom line out, you know, truth versus lie. And anyway, there's a lot more implications, and we can talk about it the second half. Isn't that fun? A friend of his, Steve, a Scorpio, college student at the time. He's now a happily married man and an engineer for some big company. But back then in the 70s, he was volunteering at the lab, first as a polygraph guinea pig, and then he was a biology major, so he brought him up to show him what was going on. Steve had 4 years of college. He says, no, this can't be real. You're just causing the instruments to react or something. You know, this is not real. So they just developed a way to separate the white cells. Now, believe me, he worked with all kinds of cells. Lots of aquariums. Most of them are empty. There's one with an electric eel that's so old we have no idea why it's still alive. But it keeps getting fed. That might be a clue. Steve was into marine biology big time. So here was one of the interesting experiments they did. They took some algae out of the bottom of the feeder fish holding tank. All right, they keep the feeder fish separate. And they put it in a test tube along with some of the gravel it was attached to, put in the electrodes, and monitored. And yes, they had a tracing. So this is at the other end where the algae is hooked up to EEG. They take some of the feeder fish and release it into the place where the predator fish are. It's dinner time. And the feeder fish are swimming around, and this is algae reacting. Over there is the first reaction. The aquarium occupants see and start to pursue the feeder fish. And then here, the big reaction is when the batfish and the horned shark start fighting over them. Okay, the algae is reacting, mind you. And it's not even in the same tank. So it just shows this, once there's a bond, algae, fish, water, that bond remains. It'll give a lot of you with your aquarium some thought. And be nice to your algae. Okay, E-Coli, another form of bacteria. Most of you are not happy with E. coli. It's sometimes fatal if you get too much. This was cultured by some students at the University of San Diego, UCSD, and they brought it over and put it in a test tube and hooked it up. This is what happened spontaneously. The E. coli was reacting to their conversation. And no one knows why, but the E. coli only reacts down, never up. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't have an up frequency, which is why it's so lethal. But that's my idea. Cleve would never say that. He says, I have no idea why it only has a downward tracing. But there they are discussing that, courses have been deleted from the curriculum. They're not happy. The E. coli reacts. Now they're talking about radionics. I'm a skeptic. Boom, another reaction. Now over there, they're talking about radionics equipment, and they're saying, I bet it's just an empty box and it's all done with the mind. Boom, more down, down, down. It's a very down thing. So this is E. coli. Now here is a recent one along the same vein. Some of you are fond of kombucha tea. I know Lucy, my healer friend, is. Some of you gave it up when you heard that it can be lethal. I believe it's only lethal if it's a culture. If things get in there and it gets cultured, then yeah, you should watch out. But I'm sure sensitives would be warned. Cleve loves kombucha tea. He's been drinking it and culturing it every day for years, and he is vigorous at the age of 80. This is recent in 1997. The movie is 1997. The experiment was 2002. Because I told him, look, if we're going to talk about kombucha, we need a tracing. Why don't you just do it? So he says, oh, okay. So he's home doing what he loves to do, watch movies, in his lab. And he hooked up some pieces of the kombucha mushroom, which is a combination of, I'm not even sure what's in it. It's not any one thing. It's a growth. It's like a mushroom. Yeah, yeast, fungus, and bacteria. But it's healthy, okay? It's happy, especially if you praise it while it's growing. And he does, So here's the tracing. And he's watching a movie he's never seen, which is Conspiracy Theory with Patrick Stewart and Julia Roberts. Mind you, yeah, well, this scene, Patrick Stewart and Julia Roberts are discussing the CIA experiments with hallucinogens and sensory deprivation, which makes the CIA look rather mean. And this is the response of the kombucha to Cleve watching the movie. Now remember, Cleve worked for the CIA for years. He was one of their scientists. He developed narco-hypnosis. He developed polygraph. He was a G-man with a high rating. And then he finds out his government is not also good. Well, anyway, he was a little reactive that moment, according to the kombucha. This is a typical scene in the lab. He teaches at the California Institute for Human Science, and every year he has one class, and he brings them up to the lab for some experiments. He has a beaker of yogurt. He has the students sitting around. Everything's spontaneous. And like many, he just decides to do something without telling them. The thing is, when you're doing this biocommunication work, if you inform your subject what you're going to do, you're going to influence it. You don't announce it and then say, this will happen, because that's a program that will create chaos in your outcome. He just, like when he was working on radio once, this very skeptical radio announcer said, I don't believe that this tomato's going to react. Great, he says, fine. He had a tomato from the same plant. One of them was hooked up, and there was a tracing, and without even announcing it, he suddenly grabbed a knife and went like this to the other tomato and cut it. And the one that was hooked up just freaked out all over the place. So those of you who are vegans, sorry, but yes, there is a response before they flatline. Which is why you pray before you eat. You pray while you're cooking, right? Thank the food before, We've talked about this a lot. It's like at one moment, what moment does death happen? For bacteria, yogurt bacteria, death happens when you mix in ampicillin. And there he is. He opened up a little thing of ampicillin, stirred it into the yogurt. There's an initial reaction. And then as as the yogurt is responding. Now remember, the yogurt that is responding is just from the same sample as the yogurt in the beaker that's being killed off by the ampicillin. So this was like a wonderful example of bacterial biocommunication. And this is the tracing. It shows the initial response and then the big one. Ampicillin does indeed kill bacteria. Well, this led to cells. He did early experiments with human blood, mainly his own, and it got a lot of chaotic reactions. There was nothing usable. But so he decided to go to chuck steak. And this is bovine muscle tissue, mainly steak. And he got it fresh and raw. He took some of it, put it in the freezer, and then he cut a piece and gave it to Sam. In the test tube is, pieces of the steak with the fresh blood in it. And while Sam is devouring his steak, there is a reaction. Okay? And then after things got a little tame, he decided to wash the cutting board. The big reaction was when he poured Ajax on the blood. So yeah, chemicals in the kitchen, deadly to blood. Don't get it in an open wound. Yes. Now here's a very interesting follow-up. A few days later, he unthaws the steak. And sure enough, there's a tracing. He didn't think there would be much. But this time, similarly, it was cold, but there was a tracing. So there is hope for those of you who believe in that cryogenics business. That yes, if the cells are frozen and unthawed, there is a chance that the life force will return. This one reacted even more when he poured the Ajax on. I guess it was saying, well, once wasn't enough, I'm going to react again. But that's me. Nobody, you're never going to get Cleve to admit that this means that. He's too much of a truth-oriented scientist. As a psychic, I can say, well, the frequency obviously was communicated from point A to point B, and here's the reaction. Yes, it makes perfect sense. But to a scientist, they have no real reason why this is happening. They can't explain it. His first experiment with human cells, Spermatozoa. And this was fun. This is all the way back in '72. He has the sperm in a test tube, and he's 40 feet away in another room. And quite spontaneously, he grabs a popper, amyl nitrate, opens it up, inhales it. And this is the reaction of the sperm. If you can't see it, it's major. Big, huge reaction. Okay? He's 40 feet away. His sperm is going, what are you doing? This is endangerment here. Well, he did several experiments with sperm. And he noticed that whenever the sperm died, there was a negative emotion that he experienced. Plus, as you know, sperm is a life-giving cell. Even though there's lots of useless sperm, its basic function is to bring life. So he started thinking about this. If it dies wrongly, in a bad way, there's going to be a negative response. He experienced it. Okay, so he decided, I'm not doing sperm anymore. Plus, then he didn't have to explain where he got the sperm. Okay. This was part of his new way. He got leukocytes from the saliva in a very short nutshell of a way. We get 12 test tubes of saline mixed with saliva, and mix it up. White cells go down to the bottom. We extract the white cells. This is the first time he extracted white cells. The moment he decided he was going to cut his hand with a razor, the white cells went all over the place, right there. He didn't even do it. Now that's what he learned first time out. The cells know intention. Once you've informed them that it's going to happen, nothing much happens. White cells are the warrior cells of the body. They have complete DNA. And here it is, the big event. It's kind of X-rated. This is when Steve White, our Scorpio student, decides to submit his white cells for experimentation. And they're discussing, after they've loaded in the white cells, and they're standing 20 feet away from the cells being tested, they're discussing an interview in Playboy magazine. So Cleve grabs the magazine, hands it to him, and it accidentally falls open to the centerfold, which at the time was Bo Derek. And Steve is determined that his cells will not react. And he looks at Bo Derek and he says, right on film, I don't think she's a 10. But his cells. So we learn compassion from science. You know, this is visceral. It's cellular. Can't help it. After he calmed down, he reached over to touch the magazine. You know, I mean, he had to close the magazine or his cells would not stop reacting. It makes you understand why certain magazines are so popular, too. It has a chemical response. Yeah, he just touched it, and there was a spike. Same guy, he had to go and take a pee a while later, and they timed it, him going to the urinal and back, and the minute his urine hit the urinal, another big reaction. So there's an event, too, when your body cells are excreted into a chemical, and they're dying. There is a little bit of a kickback. He did a whole bunch of this. This is, you know, his big crowning achievement. And of course, as you can imagine, he had to separate the donors, send them further and further away. In this case, here's a gunner sitting at home 20 miles from the lab. And this is a retired policeman. And his cells go all over the place when he sees a war movie. And they have this all timed. The moment that the plane crashes down into the ocean, the gunner's white cells are reacting. And the other one was a woman, okay? He did tons of those. This was Dr. Myra Crawford. I was here for this experiment. It was so fun. She, several PhDs. She's from the University of Alabama, Birmingham Medical School. She doesn't believe this. She would like to. She's a very dignified lady, and she decided to come and do this to find out. We got nothing from her white cells. Cleve was checking everything, making sure it's all hooked up. It was just like straight line. Until, spontaneously, her cell phone rings. And it's her daughter on the East Coast going, Mommy, hi, my boyfriend wants to take me to Israel. And, okay, you never stop being a mom. That's a woman's main reaction is, you know, any kind of threat. And then we had a long conversation about security and how great Israeli security is. And she was trying to say, well, I know she would be totally safe. And she was, you know, again, we got on to this trip. Mothers never stop being mothers. And then, of course, the final one I'm going to show you tonight was done at HeartMath in 2002. And this is with whole blood. The subject is a male research assistant. And the main thing that gets a man's buttons, money. When he was asked about his research, you know, everything was cool. But as soon as Cleve, being the devil's advocate, said, are you underpaid? It went shh all the way up. Because research assistants are not paid well. And then, of course, again, arousal when he is told that he has 10 grants he has to turn out. You know, that's a huge amount of paperwork with his pay. Guess what? The guy quit. So this was kind of prophetic. This is Dubrov, visitor from Russia, famous parapsychology, seen from the early days. And this is his former lab partner, Robert Henson, and of course his new cat, Leo. This is Cleve today. This is the new green man for the world of science. And every February 2nd, we're going to be with his tree. That's his birthday. I also brought a few copies of my metaphysical novel. Also $10, tonight only, and I'll actually sign it. My alter ego is Flora Powers. It's fun. The novel, it's a story of a young man, our Jack, sort of like Jack Tales, the third son, launching himself from Northern California into the world of metaphysical people, meeting person after person and learning lesson after lesson. And some of his lessons are in his dreams. It's a big wake-up call. You see, I've been a psychic for 30 years, and after 25 years of doing all these readings and gathering information, I had to do something with it. So, even though it's fiction, everything that happens in this book to our hero, Jack, actually happened. Human beings, amazing creatures, aren't we? There's a bunch more books in the back. If you would like to take one to a friend or someone who's kind of like wavering with their beliefs, this is really good. I heard someone here was on George Noory last night, and Cleve was on George Noory. You can go and hear his voice. The other thing is, if you have ties to Palo Alto or relatives down there, Cleve himself will be speaking at the Foundation for Mind-Being Research on May 28th. I will be there with him, God willing. And Mind-Being Research. William Gough, G-O-U-G-H, is the head of Mind-Being. He's like an incarnation of a timeless God. He has so much knowledge. He did all the research on identical twins. Fascinating. He did lots of research on organ donors and recipients. So if any of you are interested in that, check it out. We have a link to it on our website, primaryperception.com. Lots of links there to all these bizarre, wonderful avenues. Information is actually the game. I want to trigger you, the second half. I want to hear your comments. We have a mic, and let's talk about this. You know, if you have a biocommunication story you'd like to share, that would be great. Since there's 50 of us and 50 moments, keep it brief, eloquent, and to the point. Let it rip. Who has the mic? Okay, pass it there, and then.
I'm sorry, I don't have any is this on? Any bio moments, but I'm kind of wondering what I should do with this information that you just bestowed upon us. And I've heard, I was talking to people in the audience during the break, and people have told me that they believe plants have emotions, sentience, consciousness. So one of the things I was thinking is, and this is all those aspects are the way we define valuable human life, kind of. If that's the case, should we not make it, illegal to kill a plant or anything like that? What do I do with this information?
Plants, like brine shrimp, have a function, and many of them are born to feed us. I always say, look, let's not change the status quo too much. Let's just change how we do it. Like, if you're going to have a salad, thank the salad Deva if you want. What's amusing to me is I was a novelist before I met Cleve. I dealt in airy-fairy fantasy, some of which had real valuable meaning. And in my novel, Jack has visions of the plant Deva. And when he ignores it, it knocks him over the head. There are psychics out there who commune with trees and talk to trees or sit with their garden. They leave offerings. Don't worry about it. The plant kingdom is not going to judge you just because you absorb it. Maybe it's honored. Anyone have thoughts about this? Lots of you.
Well, I've heard it said that if you warn a plant that you're going to harvest it, it will go into that fainting mode
Yes.
where it will not feel the pain. So if you're aware of the fact that it can feel pain at whatever level, simply letting it know what your intentions are is a very kind thing to do, and probably the biggest way to say thank you to it for its sacrifice as food or whatever.
Yeah, there. Cleve always says grace is like informing, your food. It's time to give up the ghost.
Just, yeah, on the same subject. I don't know how I'm going to put this, but we seem to be making death a terrible thing. And I guess we really think about this. I think we could change our attitudes just a little bit to shift it to the point where, it's not that tragedy at all.
Very good point. Very good point. Plants are actually going to die anyway. And there are vegetarians who don't believe in killing the root, but only eating the leaves because they want the plant David to go on. Well, the seeds, we'll start it over again. We're all part of a cycle, right?
Yes, several things. I'll try to be brief. One is, it's hard for me, condensed version. Well, first of all, when I'm around vegetarians, I always say some of my best meals have been vegetarians. Another thing, too, is
Yes.
No matter how much you endeavor to separate yourself through distance from an experiment, because there is no such thing as objectivity, or at least that's how I feel and intuit, you're always affecting the experiment. So in other words, double-blind studies, et cetera, are fatally flawed because of that. Also, personal experience with big plants. I haven't really gone into it with the redwoods, but I had a personal enlightening moment in Los Angeles on Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue in Los Angeles is a dinky little street in a very wealthy district, but it's lined with gorgeous, for blocks, 100-year-old, 100-plus foot tall palm trees. And when I was around them, I could not only feel, I could see their energy bodies, but I started feeling their experiences, just sitting there for 100 years, looking at what the world was doing, looking at what humans were doing. And I think we're going to get to a point where it'll take intuition is the best way, but developing the instrumentation to find out just how alive this chair or a rock or so on and so forth is, because it's really, it's all one. Everything is one. And I'll stop for now.
Harold Saxton Burr did research with trees back in the 60s, I believe, and 50s, long-term monitoring of trees, and found that they do react to sunspots, electrical activity. Before Harold Saxton Burr, J.C. Bose, those of you who are into old scientists in India, developed some very intricate material to, instruments to show emotionality in trees. Also, another East Indian scientist, Singh, S-I-N-G-H, they're all referenced in our book, found that certain plants and trees grew faster and provided more fruit if they played music and did their Indian dances to the trees. Activation. And Cleve fervently believes in the old Sadie Hawkins Day rituals to activate, the spring, rites of spring, leaping over the fire, women chasing men, men chasing women, finding a place to go activate the fertility process. Anyone just wake up? Or is anyone exhausted from your last rite? Yeah, bring the mic up here. Yeah, this lady.
Well, I talk to rocks and everybody, but last fall when I brought my plants in from outdoors, I have a Schefflera that was way too big for my house, and I was pretty loud in my complaints about how big it was, and it lost the whole top and lost and lost. It's still, I keep telling it now, it's okay, you can get as big as you want, and it's like, no. It really responded to my complaint about its size. I know.
Well, then you would probably be good at bonsai if you wanted to be. If you really want to be mean. People who do bonsai, I mean, they torture those things. Wire them down. Keep them gnarly. I mean, it's like putting braces on your teeth 24 hours a day, but all over your body. Just to have a miniature tree, but they don't seem to mind. They're sort of like dolphins in captivity, you know. They still can be joyful. I don't think the plant kingdom judges as us. There are some shamans I've met who have warned me that if you wrong a tree deva, it can reach out and hurt you. And there are some people who insist that each tree, especially the big ones, have a soul, and you can commune. But there's no way of knowing if it's our listening to a story, like you're reading the Psalms, or if you're projecting your human emotionality on it. You'll never get Cleve to admit that plants have all these different emotions. He'll say, look, I got a response. What it means is your interpretation. And this is where we're at right now. We're right on the bridge. What does this mean? And how much responsibility do you want to take? I'm just going to give you permission not to worry about it because it's all in you already. And one of these days you'll be taking a nap and you'll find yourself communing with the potted plant, or maybe the flowers right outside, or maybe somehow a bird will tune you into a frequency and all of a sudden it'll wake up. Never know. I'm just giving you some permission.
I'll share a story.
Okay, take the mic. We all want to hear it.
I'm trying to simplify it down.
Well, go to the beginning.
Okay, basically what it was is I was in a beach chair in my backyard sunning, and I was reading something, and I was getting very, very hot and wanting to cool down, but I wanted to keep reading, and this bee kept flying around me, near me, and at first, my first impulse was to shoo it away, but I was in a certain space at the time, so instead of shooing it away, I said, wait, let's see what happens. So I put what I was reading down. The bee came and started flying all over my chest and around my face, and actually the wings moving started cooling me down.
Whoa.
And then as I cooled down and relaxed more, and then I thought, wow, I'd really like to see him closer up. And he literally flew right here and rotated. And I'm watching him. I mean, he's circling around right in front of me. Then that stopped, and then he literally, I thought he was, well, one other thing occurred. A fly came by, and the bee chased it off.
My territory.
And this whole event went on for close to 2 hours.
Wow.
He started flying all up and down all my meridians, all around. It was an incredible experience. And when it was all over, I was so high, I was hearing symphonies in the of the birds singing in the trees. I mean, it tuned me in that much just because I stopped, paid attention, and listened instead of doing the automatic, get out of here, you're bothering me kind of thing.
Well, I wish you that's a treasure of a story.
Oh, yeah.
And I have one little tiny piece of information about bees. I mean, I did study them in school. When I was over in Greece, tootling around Delphi, I whipped out my flute and started playing a duet with the bee. Guess which pitch they were humming?
Wow.
That happens to correlate with the purple ray if you line up the spectrum and the scales. It's a pretty high frequency. And so the bee was awakening you and your very thought. There's a man, J. Ellen Boone, wrote a book called Kinship with All Life. I know you would love it. It's the only book Cleve has read cover to cover since he left school. But it spoke to him. His experiments with a big fly in the lab ended when he didn't tell Lillian, his secretary, that he was actually going to experiment with it. You know, he had been communing with the same fly for 2 days, and then she killed it without asking. You gotta, you know, oh well. He got the point. You know, it would come when he called it.
Do you think, after reading Kinship with All Life, I've had 2 fly buddies. One of them hung for maybe 6 weeks before it disappeared. And my sense of it is that they have really powerful energy fields. I mean, they're tiny little things, but you can feel them from, what do you
Some
think?
are more intelligent, but I have a suspicion that, like with kittens and puppies, we humans empower them. If we provide feedback, they give it back. I've done this, you know. I had a really dumb dog once. I mean, my son brought it home. It was the runt. We had to nurse it, and it was a hassle. And it was the stupidest dog I'd ever had. And I said, I can't have a stupid dog. So I experimented by putting a little pyramid over its brain, and every time I saw it, I gave it permission to get smarter. Well, it was kind of a failure. She's still dumb, but she is the sweetest, most loving, and she knows my every desire. I tuned her into me. So don't try this with your animals. You know, there may be some other effect. They might enter into your dreams. I healed my cat once, and I thought she was dead when I found her, but she was covered with ants. She'd been attacked by a pit bull in her own house while I was gone. And when I found her, she was covered with ants, so I vacuumed them off, and I had just done a reading for a veterinarian who happened to be a cat specialist. So I reached over and grabbed all of his spirit guides and yanked them over to the cat, and I said, heal this cat. She's my only cat. She was 13. She could have died, but she came back. And she lasted another 10 years. She was like totally different afterwards. I think the original cat soul left and a different one came in, because she was like totally different. It was a gift. Now, again, you try these things, you don't know what you're going to get. That's nature. And I think it is okay to fool around with Mother Nature if your intention is good.
Yes, I'd like to know if scientists can measure the nutrient value in plants and what makes it go up and down. Because I love to eat green stuff.
Ah.
And if there's something I can do so that the nutrient value is retained, you know, the high potency of nutrients, I'd like to know that.
I would say the person to ask would be a greenhouse grower, someone who has hydroponics. They know all about that. They know how to feed just the maximum nutrients. I just witnessed that, actually. You know, Cleve is a instrumentation man. He doesn't get into nutrients. If he did, he would eat different. He wouldn't eat ice cream. But hey, yes, I mean, ask a hydroponics expert. You know, I do know with fruit trees that the amount of minerals gets depleted, and if you don't replace it, your fruit gets sour. That I know. I mean, this group probably has a lot more knowledge than I do. But yes, nutrients are important. But in terms of the energy form of a plant, you know, like with Bose's work and Singh's work, you know, singing and playing raga music, they had tremendous, the same nutrients, but just tremendous empowerment. And Findhorn, check out Findhorn. You know, over in Scotland, they have, it's a very spiritual merging of earth and spiritual humans.
Are you going to play your flute?
Yeah, I thought I would close with a song to the elements in honor of our earth and the plants that give us so much entertainment. But before I do that, I know you all love to sing. Any other biocommunication stories? There's one.
I got one that I think that I have experienced a strong sense of another person being ill. I've been disturbed. I didn't know why I was very disturbed for a long time, and I didn't know. It was like a cloud was there, and I didn't know what it was. I mean, it was like come and go, and I wasn't conscious of it yet. Then I was conscious of it, and it was there, and it didn't go away. And then several months later, I discovered that my father had cancer, and he didn't even know he had cancer, and it was very strong. And so I've sensed a lot of the instantaneous feeling from people I know that are like 2,000 miles away, that I know when they're feeling good or when they're feeling bad, and you can sense that stuff. So I don't know if I believe in all this stuff, yet I've really experienced it, if you know what I mean.
I gather you do not consider yourself a psychic.
No, I mean, I don't consider myself anything except that I know that I do believe in instant communication at 2,000 miles and knowing what's going on. And I do believe in sensing disturbances.
You believe in love?
Yeah.
Okay. Love is affinity, a oneness where there is no separation, like for instance between you and your father. Your father's spirit was signaling his disease before he was aware of it because he wasn't necessarily in touch himself. Most of our parents were not, psychic. I mean, there's some exceptions, of course. But it was not considered worthy, but now it's getting a lot of study. I do know that a suicidal person sends out a signal that repels everyone because their spirit is in battlement with their ego. The ego wants to end it all, and the spirit's saying, what for? There is no end. There is no death. Don't be in such a rush. But yes,
But I had gone around and asked everybody that I knew, are they okay? Is everything okay? And everybody said, yeah, everything was fine.
Did you go to church?
No.
Maybe in your last life you were one of those, who is the one who's sick? I feel like you were charismatic in another life. And then it turned out wrong, so you came back as a straight guy. That's just a feeling.
I don't really comprehend all of that.
Your story is worth a lot more than my comment, please, and thank you for sharing that, because you're reading signals. You said, I don't see, but I know.
But I don't, you can't prove it. It's like, they talk about the speed of light. I mean, this is as fast as the speed of light.
It's instantaneous. Yeah. Did I mention that in Cleve's white cell, with the donor cells in the test tube, they put the donor 20 miles away, then 25 miles away. A friend of his in the Army Intelligence Corps replicated the experiment, and they had their donor 50 miles away, and there was an instantaneous response to an arousal. The arousal is usually a threat of death or a very stressful experience, or sexual arousal. Those are three easy measurements nice conversation, you get a pretty even line. But if someone's going to die, there's a signal. And it's a pretty major thing. I mean, non-psychics get dreams, they get announcements. I remember I was like 1 week married to my husband, and his grandfather appeared at the foot of our bed and made an announcement that he was going to die. I mean, it's like he said, now that you're married, I know you're going to be all right. Ha ha. I'm out of here. So, it was just like there's always a spiritual communication, whether you are tuned in or not. If you want to get more tuned in, just practice a little meditation now and then, or just say hello to your higher self once in a while. It can be very, very simple. And you'll find that my gosh, I met 3 engineers at a DNA conference in December. I mean, and these guys are straight as they come, with the pencils in the pocket, everything, And here they are learning how to activate DNA. It's a new form of healing, and not new, just, the system is new. Just like Reiki has always been around. Just has many, many different names. Lots of Reiki healers here, right? Yes.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.